Hello and welcome to this interview in the series that is all about empowering a league of extraordinary mothers on how to use the power of food to boost our energy, get the body we love and get back that zest for life that we all crave. Today's interview is with Ali Miller. She's an integrative functional dietitian and the author of the Food as Medicine for Optimal Health Cookbook and the Anti-Anxiety Diet. And today she's going to help us to understand the role of food on our mood. Ali, congratulations on releasing the Anti-Anxiety Diet that dropped, I think you said just a week ago. Is that right?
Yes. It's been quite an undertaking. My first book was self-published, so this book is through a publisher, and it's been a different roller coaster.
Yeah, okay.
Kind of nice to have a second set of eyes, but it's a little bit of a tennis match back and forth with all of the edit rounds and everything. It felt much more laborious, but I'm confident that it's a fantastic end product and a wonderful resource.
Oh, congratulations, Ali. That's just a monumental effort, and I'd love to see it. I can't wait to get a copy.
Absolutely.
Let's start today's interview with the question that I love, which is, what brought you to be doing the work that you do? What's your story?
Sure. So I am a integrative functional medicine dietitian. So I am a registered dietitian, but my background is in naturopathic medicine. So I went to a naturopathic college of medicine, and rather than becoming a naturopathic doctor, I took the registered dietitian route. Mm-hmm. So I kind of have one foot on each bank of the water, if you will, of what would be deemed as allopathic or conventional medicine. That's where the kind of dietitian world would be. And then the other bank of the river of the naturopathic, more grounded in nature, but yet rooted in science. And I've always been a seeker of health. I actually started college as a ballerina, as a dance major, and always have been very acutely aware of the influence that nutrients and food has on human performance and metabolism. And I transitioned into becoming very eco-conscious. My boyfriend at the time was organic farming. And I started to realize that my dance career would not be long-lived. It was probably going to be teaching in a studio, which I was doing in high school. So I kind of shifted gears into biochemistry in the medical world. And I found a great path at the naturopathic clinic because it was a great kind of marriage of both this integrative, eco-conscious nutrition world of food as medicine, as well as marrying with biochemistry and anatomy and physiology and the sciences that I'm still quite right-brained in my mindset as well.
Yeah. I loved those subjects as well. And I know that when I was doing naturopathy, that we had quite a lot of nurses that were going through at the same time, and that grounding in the training that they'd done was just so valuable.
Yes, absolutely. And seeing and understanding how systems work on both ends of the spectrum is very important, because most patients, I like to call them clients because they come at will, and but they have been through the rigmarole. I always say I work with many zebras, which means, individuals that maybe don't fit a single diagnostic code or are told for so long that nothing's wrong or it's in their head. And I really like to honor and look at each individual as kind of a detective of their body. And that was the crux of really developing the anti-anxiety diet, because I've found that the Achilles heel in so much of our health story is unmanaged stress access. And if we don't correct that from the root cause, we're going to constantly be dealing with varied medical disturbances and undesired symptoms.
Yeah. Ali, throughout the last series that I did, which was really much more focused on teenage girls, the topic of anxiety is just this umbrella that seems to be so epidemic. And it's not just our teenage girls, although it's rife in that demographic, but for mums as well. What's going wrong? What's happened? Why is this suddenly seem to be something that we're all struggling with?
Well, I think there's so many factors, and one really has to do with the society shift and technology advances, because we're so inundated with concept is, and social media contributes very heavily and isn't really discussed enough as far as being inundated with perfection and these ideals and demands of where we should be. And we find ourselves second guessing or ruminating or questioning our day-to-day motions. And we live in a society that rewards people that are, spread very thin, the working mother that's wearing many hats, that's juggling soccer camp and all of the things. And we don't take enough time to ground and reroute and reconnect with the body. And also we tend to accept a lot of the alarms and bells of the system telling us when we're frazzled or burned out or imbalanced, and accepting that as norm. This is just what tired is, or this is just what, it must look like to be 30 or 40 or whatever it is. And I think so much of my focus and my purpose is to help to empower women that they can optimize and thrive versus simply survive through their day-to-day demands.
Yes, that's yeah. That's what we're after. So let's look at addressing anxiety. What there's a normal way, which seems to be that we go off to the GP and get a medication. Can you talk a little bit about, what that picture looks like and maybe what some other options would be?
Sure. So, conventional medicine takes this downstream effect. So when we're talking about medications, they're generally going to be SSRIs or SSRNIs. So working with our receptors for serotonin or norepinephrine, and then there are drugs like Wellbutrin, which work on dopamine. But all of those drugs work downstream on our neurotransmitters on a receptor level. And unfortunately, when prescribed, are often done in a 5 to 10 minute visit without the practitioner really understanding the whole story of the individual, and definitely, at least in the States, not doing advanced testing on what might be imbalanced as far as genetic predispositions or microbiological, looking at the microbiome and the gut bacteria, looking at the state of inflammation. We actually see that when the body is under a moderate level of inflammation, those inflammatory chemicals cross the blood-brain barrier and interfere with the way that our neurotransmitters work. And so my book takes a 6 different entry point approach, looking at inflammation and how to reduce it, looking at resetting the microbiome, repairing the gut lining in the sense of leaky gut, restoring micronutrients, and talking about the building blocks to produce neurotransmitters as well as other mood stabilizing minerals. And then the adrenal glands and how we need to work to rebound them, but also not over rev them to get optimized neurotransmitter and mood management and energy stability. And then my final R is on rebalancing your neurotransmitters. So, there's so many more upstream, as I call it, entry points that can drive an imbalance in mood, whether it's manic depression, anxiety, bipolar disorder, and so many ways and shapes in between, or just feeling brain fog or empty or less than ourselves, or irritable and short fuse. And so many of these things are downstream based on some of these other entry points. So my book walks you through each of those spaces and provides a quiz at the end of each chapter to help you to really identify which area you may need to focus on more. It doesn't have to be done in a pathological setting in sense. Someone may need more focus on the adrenals, where another person might need more on the biome and another one on inflammation. And it's really going to depend on what the body is telling us on a symptom level, and other environmental factors, medications that are being used, and contributors towards that imbalance.
Yeah. Okay. So when we think about stress as busy mums, and or that exhaustion, that lack of energy, I'm feeling it because I've worked all day and I've got up and I've made breakfast, lunch and dinner for the kids, and I've cleaned the house and I've done the laundry and I've gone to work and I've come back. They're all very valid reasons why we struggle to find enough energy, and I don't want to take away from that. But what I'd love to focus on is the role that food plays and how we can really boost our ability to cope with all the day-to-day stuff that's not going to go away, in the way that we eat. How can we support ourselves to feel better?
So one of the two big things on a big picture level that I would focus on, one of the elements in my book that I focus on a lot is reducing carbohydrates. And the reason for that is that when we're running solely on glucose or blood sugar as our primary fuel, we are setting ourselves up for this mountain and valley type distribution of blood sugar highs and blood sugar lows. And that can impact mood, where we can feel very, people call it hangry, hungry and anger, or irritable, or brain fog, or dizzy, those hypoglycemic or low blood sugar symptoms. And then even on the highs, we're more prone towards distressing the system, going into excessive insulin and body fat storage, which can only drive more guilt, shame, depression, and imbalance. So I really look to try to transition the body into a nutritional ketosis where we're running on both glucose and ketones. So not an extreme strict form of a very low carbohydrate. I actually have 2 phases of my protocol, where we teach the body that fat can be a more high octane brain fuel. And if deciding to not go into production of nutritional ketones, the individual still, by enhancing or increasing the fat intake, will get a lot of more grounded effect, more mood stability, more stabilized blood sugar. Fat kind of sits on carbohydrates to reduce that dynamic spiking, so we also don't get as dynamic of a crash. So incorporating things like full fat nut butters and avocado and coconut oil, and being mindful of avoiding what I call naked carbs, or anytime you have a carbohydrate food, if you're to eat fruit or starchy vegetables, those should always be paired with a protein or a healthy fat. And that will help that delivery to be more sound than just grabbing a banana out the door. We're actually better off just grabbing a spoon of nut butter, which might be even easier, pretty equal calorically as far as the impact on the body, but the blood sugar impact will be very different. Yeah. And, then if we need more fuel, we can max that out. So carbohydrate control is a big piece of the puzzle, and that helps us to feel less of the dynamics of blood sugar imbalance. And then the second thing I focus on is getting enough protein. Protein is one that often women that are running on low energy, it feels sometimes cumbersome to prepare a meat, or to, it's heat, it's cooking, that sometimes is a barrier. And I find that with breastfeeding mamas all the way through, perimenopause and so forth, protein is so important to help to support metabolic function. And also it provides us the most satiety or satisfaction. So it holds over our appetite. And our neurotransmitters, serotonin, dopamine, glutamate, all of these, they are made from protein amino acid building blocks. So we need ample dietary protein to really be the juice or the fuel source to help to balance out that brain chemistry as well.
So what does enough protein look like, Ali, in a day?
Sure.
Say we're eating 3 times a day, what does enough protein look like?
So generally speaking, I look at calculation in kilograms of like 0.8 to 1.2 grams of protein per kilogram. So as a reference, what that would look like for someone that's around 150 pounds is going to be around a middle point of about 70 grams of protein. And each ounce of biological protein, so an egg is a single ounce, a 5-ounce piece of salmon or grass-fed steak or chicken, you name it, but biological protein, each ounce is 7 grams. So if that individual was taking maybe 2 eggs and avocado and sliced tomatoes for their breakfast, or maybe using a scoop of collagen protein in a smoothie of sorts, or a grass-fed whey protein. Those would all be reasonable breakfast options. And then at that lunch, they may have canned tuna, they may have pieces of turkey rolled up with avocado slice and a sheet of nori. They may have some salmon on a salad, or even some charcuterie, like a meat and cheese plate with some olives. I call it adult lunchable. It works very well, just kind of grab and go, and pickled vegetables and things like that. And then about a 4 to 5 ounce portion in the evening. So really being mindful of getting that protein at all meals, and some range of 2 to 5 ounces at each sitting would be appropriate.
Yeah. Okay. Do you, because this is something that seems to come up over and over again, I keep seeing, people advocating, whether we talk about the pros and cons of vegetarian or vegan versus eating meat, is one subject, but whether let's presume we're talking about people that eat meat, do you advocate eating some form of meat at each meal, or non-vegetarian? So maybe eggs and sausage at breakfast and some fish at lunch and steak or something at dinner. Is that reasonable, or is that too much meat in a day?
No, rotation is definitely key. And I actually, in the opening of my book, share my personal story. I was actually a raw vegan when I was diagnosed with autoimmune disease. And I do feel, and not to say as a blanket statement that everyone is going to get sick when eating a vegan diet. By no means am I saying that. I'm saying for my constitution and my body, it didn't work. And I had very severe anemia and very remarkably low B12. And that's actually what drove me into panic attacks and anxiety. And so there are ways that you can eat my anti-anxiety diet and the layout while being vegetarian, but very difficult to be vegan, if not to incorporate eggs and dairy and such, because there just are a lot of anti-nutrients in the plant-based compounds. And the meat forms are more bioavailable. The animal does the work for us. Mm. And so there's something to be said about that. And especially for those of us that are a little bit distressed already, we need the most bioavailable, powerful, absorbable forms. And I'm a big proponent of what I deem as snout to tail philosophy, which literally means really respecting and honoring the animal and consuming all edible parts. And when we look ancestral trends, as far as consumption of bone broth and consumption of skin for hide and collagen and all of these other forms that have been greatly neglected in modernized ground meat, we see a lot more nutritional diversity, a lot more concentration of antioxidants in things like organs. We get a lot of CoQ10 and B vitamins, and these are things that are really bioavailable only in the animal form. So a lot of our most therapeutic, nourishing foods that help, for instance, especially like with leaky gut and gut repair, you cannot really mimic gelatin and collagen and the role that has on our intestinal lining. You can find other mucilaginous, fancy word for oopie-goopy herbs like slippery elm and aloe and cat's claw, and those can help. But there's a different influence on the body when we're pairing with that biologic. So I still do believe in a very plant-heavy and antioxidant-rich diet, but the biological forms of protein I find to be far superior. And then getting the variety of sources as well as the variety of cuts within the source is very important as well.
Yeah. I see more and more people leaning towards vegan and vegetarian diet, which is funny because we've just done the whole paleo where everyone's living on sausages.
Yeah, it's a pendulum, yes.
But I was vegetarian for 20 years, had 4 pregnancies, breastfed for about 6 years, and so blamed my lack of energy and my hangry moods and the quantities of food that I needed to eat just to survive those times. Came out the other end, and despite eating an organic diet, whole food diet, ticking all those boxes, I just wasn't healthy. And I had to start eating meat, and it completely turned my healthy.
Yes.
It's an interesting, with there's so many people that seem to have done this roller coaster
Mm-hmm.
of trying different things, but it's yeah, that's been my
I,
journey as well.
I say often with anything, and I fit into that same category where I silence so many things because of the doctrine and the commitment to ethics, or, you know, whatever the buy-in is. And one of my favorite phrases in my practice, whether it's someone that's hardcore keto or going carnivore or vegan, or, I mean, there's so many different ways we define diet. But I like to use this mantra that doctrine creates disconnect. And so if you're so focused on doctrine and guidelines and rules, and you're viewing your diet as a religion of sorts, and, you know, it's the end all be all,
Yeah.
then you're going to have a very difficult time really understanding the connectedness of the body and the signals and needs of the body. And the body will shift its needs with season. You know, for instance, you know, I may be eating more starchy vegetables in the cooler months, and that's when they're available by the abundance of the earth, and they're also very fitting for the body on, you know, Ayurvedic and varied forms of kind of energy and plant medicine. And so listening and being open to understanding if the body's high stress, if the body's in a relaxed mode, we're going to need different frequency of eating, different composition, and there's no end all be all. There's an entry point and there's helpful generalized tips, of course, but we need to listen first and foremost, I think, to really heal.
Yeah. Yeah. I wholeheartedly agree. Can we touched a bit more on protein. Can we go back to carbohydrate? Because this is just the biggest one for those of us that have grown up with the food pyramid and had grain for breakfast, grain for morning tea, grain for afternoon tea, and then a bit more grain for dinner, and probably, you know, a bicky to end the day.
Yes.
This is a massive shift for people. So can we go back and touch on that a bit more, and just if you can connect that with our moods, as well as, you know, just how much we should be eating in a day and what that carbohydrate actually looks like.
Sure. So when we're talking about carbohydrates and glucose, so our blood sugar is dependent on how much carbohydrate we consume, essentially. And all carbohydrates break down into glucose. Carbohydrates are predominantly sourced from our grains and our grain products, so flour-based foods, pastas, rices, cookies, pastries, crackers, starchy vegetables, fruits, and then sweets would be kind of in that grain and flour category, but also refined sugars somewhere in the middle, so candies, sodas, and all of those things. So those all collectively are going to contribute to our carbohydrate intake. And, you know, the standard intake is somewhere around 300 grams a day on average of most people this day and age. And if someone who's maybe watching, maybe around 200. And even the American Dietetic Association, you know, diabetes diet is 150 to 300 grams. So pretty wild. A ketogenic diet, which literally reduces the dependence on glucose and starts to transition the body into using ketones, or producing these compounds from the liver that are produced by metabolism of your own body's fat as fuel, as well as the fat you're consuming in the diet as fuel, generally speaking, requires a restriction of around 30 grams of carbohydrate or less per day. So very dramatic reduction. And what that means is those 30 grams come from residual foods, meaning eliminating those entire categories, including fruits and starchy vegetables. And those 30 grams come from the residual carbohydrates in an avocado, which would otherwise be classified as a fat, or in a couple almonds, which would otherwise, again, be classified as a fat, or the non-starchy vegetables like asparagus or Brussels sprouts or bell pepper or zucchini. Those would be categorized as non-starchy vegetables, but will still contribute some carbohydrate. And that's where you get that 30-gram threshold. So it's truly eliminating carbohydrate foods as far as a category, and then even so being mindful of those residual carbs. And so my most aggressive diet uses a ketogenic diet, and that's the kind of entry point. The reason why I do that with anxiety, it's very interesting and compelling research. We have acknowledged since the 1940s the role of ketones crossing the blood-brain barrier and influencing epilepsy. So it's a very big tool acknowledged in the medical field to manage seizures. Well, the mechanism of a seizure is extreme excitatory impulse in the brain. And so it's these charges of signaling that don't allow GABA, which is an inhibitory mellower outer, to dock. And if we think of anxiety or panic attack, it's not to the level of seizing, but we can get tremors, we can get shortness of breath, we can get a lot of the impact of excessive epinephrine and suboptimal GABA receptor function. So the fact that ketones can cross our blood-brain barrier actually can work as a tool to create a very grounding, stabilized mood. And we see a lot of studies in anti-aging, Alzheimer's, cognitive decline on the role of ketones because they reduce oxidative stress to the brain and they fuel the mitochondria. So there's a lot of exciting and fun, interesting, I think, cutting edge studies coming out on how this can be used as a tool. It's quite dynamic, and so I include in my book also what's called phase 2 as a low glycemic protocol, and that protocol allows upwards of 75 grams of carbs. So it still is low carbohydrate. This would, as an example, include maybe 1 to 2 fruits. Again, they would be paired with maybe some full-fat yogurt and coconut shreds and pecans and cinnamon, and then maybe half of a roasted cup of butternut squash or sweet potato with your sirloin steak and your Brussels sprouts, and maybe a little bit more liberalized to include a glass of wine or so. So there's give in that, and I give different freedom on how you can cycle back and forth, where they fit, and things to look for in your body of what part you need and where and when. But I don't recommend throughout my entire practice ever going above that 75 to 90. I don't find it to be necessary. And I find that as that hemoglobin A1C or 3-month blood sugar average increases, statistics only show a higher propensity towards depression, anxiety, and mental illness. So there is a direct trend with both inflammation and elevated blood sugar levels on mental health.
I'm fascinated listening to you with the training that you've done. I know here in Australia there's just such a backlash to this information from the Dietetics Association here in Australia that are saying it's really dangerous to be telling people to cut out grains. I mean, that's how we eat in our house, and I know that we're all doing really well on it. And I think living your message is proof enough for me. I can see what works for us in our house across, a broad range of ages. But, why are people, is it just that we've got so indoctrinated with this belief of needing to have a lot of grain in our diet that's called, where is this fear coming from when there's so much science behind?
Yes. I think there's a couple of things. One is the confusion of the term ketoacidosis and nutritional ketosis. So ketoacidosis, which is a very severe and scary, life-threatening condition. Ketoacidosis occurs only in non-controlled, insulin-dependent diabetics. And this is when their blood sugar levels are very, very high. So like in the 300s plus. And they haven't used, either they had a fault with their pump or they haven't used their insulin dosage appropriately. And so their blood sugar level goes extremely high and the sugar can't get into the cells because they don't have any insulin. And so they start to produce ketones at a very high toxic level, significantly higher than anyone could get to on any biochemical level from pure carbohydrate restriction. Yes. So I think that in its sense is a misnomer, and many people get confused, and many conventional doctors, they learned about it in one chapter, of their anatomy and physiology, and they say, oh, well, ketosis is a bad thing, because it's ketoacidosis, and that drives a pH change in the blood that's harmful for the kidneys, and you can die. And that's, again, very true, but can only happen for a uncontrolled diabetic that is in high blood sugar range. So even an uncontrolled diabetic doing a tight carbohydrate control very likely could not go into ketoacidosis. It would be an uncontrolled diabetic having a carb load, having a big gulp soda or Gatorade, these very high sugary beverages, and not having the insulin. So it's totally different conditions, but I think the term, unfortunately, being very close creates confusion. And you do produce ketones in both sense, but in ketoacidosis, it's 30 plus times the amount that you could, again, ever produce naturally in the body when not having high carbohydrate intake, and still having moderate insulin production. So I think that's one big thing of a misunderstanding. And then I think the other is, unfortunately, financial platforms and interest. And I always have to tread lightly. I tease my husband. He's like, someone's going to knock on our door one day. But you know, the American Dietetic Association, at least I can speak for, they were funded by General Mills, which is a big cereal company and conglomerate at that. I mean, even you talk about varied brands that they own under their umbrella. And so there's a lot of vested lobbyists and interest in telling us that health is dependent on the consumption of grains. And you go back to what funded that, and a lot of that was, at least again in the States, because we were not fit to fight in the draft population weight in the 50s because people were underweight. And so we created these obesogenic crops, and we funded and taught people to eat more carbohydrates, just like we fatten up a cow before slaughter and feed them corn instead of grass. So I think that when you look at it, it seems so clear. But unfortunately, there's a lot of unraveling within how the data gets disseminated to the public, and cherry picking of what studies are read louder. And the ones that don't work for corporate interests aren't discussed. And the ones that do work are the ones they yell from the rooftop. And that kind of is what it is.
You're not the only one that's going to tread on that subject in this series. I have Professor Tim Noakes. I've interviewed, and he spent 3 years in court because but he won.
Yes, we all clapped for him at KetoCon when I was lecturing. Just back when it came out. Yes,
very exciting. His interviews is
awesome. I can't wait to watch it.
All right, so let's bring this back to our mood and how we get that zest for life back and a bit more energy. We've got to talk about chocolate. If we're talking about good mood, can we eat chocolate, Ali? Can we have?
Yeah, you can. And so there's actually something called theobromine, and that's one of the compounds in chocolate. And chocolate actually influences our serotonin expression. It also has a euphoric impact in the body, and it has a good source of minerals, zinc, magnesium, copper, and many minerals that it's quite rich in. And so having 100% cacao or dark chocolate, meaning 85% or higher of the cacao concentration, that percent represents how much of true cacao versus and cocoa butter versus sugar added. And so getting the higher is not only going to be lower carbohydrate and lower refined sugar, but you're going to get more of the therapeutic compounds. So I actually have a recipe for collagen hot cocoa in the book. And that's actually in the gut restoring chapter, where we're focusing on lining and sealing that gut integrity, which is going to also enhance the absorption of our nutrients and create a better barrier of defense to ensure we're not having as much inflammatory reaction to the foods that we do consume. So I use that in that recipe. And I think there's a couple more. There's a couple cookies that I use. And I'm all about avoiding non-caloric sweeteners as well. So I use this term a lot of channeling savory and really redefining the palate. And I think that if we replace these sugars with stevia and monk fruit and erythritol and these sugar alcohols, we're continuing to perpetuate that unhealthy or abnormal expectation for what sweet is and these cravings for sweet, which is only going to set us up for failure to make this a sustainable change. So all of my baked goods, I have on my blog, for instance, a avocado keto brownie, and it uses avocado and almond flour and cashew nut butter, and it has melted ghee and melted coconut oil, and then a half cup of raw cacao powder, and I believe 6 eggs all in there. And so it's this really dense, creamy like cake. I use 4 dates to sweeten it. So I take 4 dried dates and we rehydrate them in warm water and we puree them and make like a paste. So even though that is a dried fruit, the composition of making 16 brownies out of it and having a quarter of a date is very still low carbohydrate, low glycemic, and high fat with the added avocado, coconut oil, and ghee. That it's a really good mood stabilizing food, but yet it also allows us to not get that dynamic spike or that abnormal craving that keeps us kind of revved up, and doesn't allow us to appreciate the natural sweetness of a macadamia nut or an almond. And I think that to really make it a sustainable change, we have to appreciate these subtle flavors and take out that sterilized, dulled palate of the industrial processed foods.
Yeah. You're making me hungry. I want to come in.
I'll send you the recipe when we hang up.
Yeah, fantastic. So we are getting close to the end of our interview. Is there anything on your heart that you feel like we haven't touched on that would be helpful for mums in this series?
Yes. So one thing I would really speak to is the benefit of adaptogens and herbs, and also nutrients and supplements in general. I think that, looking at, again, kind of downstream being those medications, upstream is the use of supplements to give the body what it needs to create or make, or to protect the body from burnout. So, my book does have a huge guide in each of those chapters of different active nutrients that can be taken, or herbal components like adaptogens like ginseng and ashwagandha and rhodiola and cordyceps. And I find personally, to be a superhuman mother that I am, with a 2-year-old and a full clinic and the book coming out and all the things, that I really am proactive with exactly what it sounds, supplementing my diet with nutritional components that protect my body when I know I'm on full steam demand. If I know I have to answer patient emails, unfortunately, until 1 a.m. on a certain night, hopefully not every, I need to then be proactive about what that's going to do to my body. And so giving ourselves that permission for self-care and being proactive with nutrition strategy, I think, is important. And knowing when our demands exceed what we can provide with food, and not seeing that as a failure, but seeing that as a way you can further empower your body, I think is a very positive thing to consider.
Yeah, fantastic. So I know you have a free gift for our audience. So yes, can you just tell us a bit about that?
Yes, so it is a functional food plan. So all of the recipes included in it are going to provide you with food as medicine information. So you're going to learn about, with each recipe, how the ingredients of focus work in your body, so you can take that beyond the dish that you create, and all of them will be in that great macronutrient composition of low carbohydrate, high fat, moderate protein. But you can take the information you learn about each focal ingredient to the next dinner party, the next table, the next picnic, and continue to understand the whys versus just the what to do. So it will take you beyond the week of the meal plan, and empower you to really use food as medicine to optimize your mood and optimize whole body health.
Fantastic. I can't wait to get a copy of that. Thank you so much for your time today. As I sit here, I think I'm sitting here in Victoria in Australia, and you're in Houston, Texas, and there's really nothing to stop us mums just taking over the world.
I love it. Put out the charges.
Yeah, we just all can connect and share this amazing wisdom, and there's going to be all these mums that are tapping into this. And so I'm so grateful for your time. Thank you, Ali.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thank you.
All right. Bye for now.